Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Day 2 of my naturopathic beekeeping challenge. So I hope you all got on well yesterday and wrote down your whys. I know I've got several platforms, so I'm live here this morning on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. So do comment below. So today's challenge, this is all about feeding the bees. So feeding the bees. Now you may think, why do the bees need feeding? Well, in conventional beekeeping, it's all about the honey. Now, I don't like it all to be about the honey because we're forgetting that the bees need the honey for themselves. So they're actually collecting nectar, bringing it back to the hive, turning it into honey, and they use the honey for two things. First of all, they want the honey to make their beeswax, and of course the beeswax is their home, so they need the honey to make the beeswax. And secondly, they actually need the honey to feed themselves through the winter. So they need it through the summer. Here in Britain, if we have a bad summer, if we have a wet few weeks, the bees can't fly. So they've got to have honey inside the hive to feed themselves. So feeding the bees. So first of all, it's about the honey for the bees. So that's the first thing. But more importantly, where do they get the honey from? It's nectar from the plants. Now, if there aren't enough plants, there won't be enough nectar for the bees to collect and turn into honey. So this is one of the problems. Now, if you're going to have bees, everybody thinks, oh yeah, I'll get a beehive, I'll buy in some bees, you get a packet of bees. What you're doing then is you're introducing between 10 and 50,000 more hungry mouths that need feeding in your environment. So this is why I do not advocate buying in bees. Now, in the world, there are 22,000 species of bees, and there are 11 species of honeybees. Here in the UK, we have 270 species of bees and only one honeybee. Now, it's all those other species that are the main pollinators. So they need nectar and pollen. They need nectar for the carbohydrate. They need pollen for the protein. So they're all collecting nectar from flowers too. Now, it takes 1 acre of flowering plants to feed 1 colony of bees. Now, an acre of flowering plants, we're talking about the ancient wildflower meadows. So they'd be flowering for 6 to 8, maybe even 12 weeks with a rotation of different flowers. Now, who has flowers flowering in their garden all year round that are all good for bees? Many people say, oh, I've got a lavender patch and the bees love the lavender, but they only flower for a few weeks. So what are the bees going to feed on for the rest of the year? There's 52 weeks in the year. Now, bees will be flying and collecting nectar if it's over 10 degrees. Here, I've got some naturalized or even native, wild bees that are now in hives. And I've seen them flying. Last week, it was 5 degrees and they were flying. So that's an indication that they're the native black bee, the Apis mellifera mellifera. So if they're flying at lower temperatures, that means that they're going to be using up fuel, which is the honey that they've got in their hive, and therefore their stores are not going to last so long. The Apis mellifera mellifera is a bit more frugal with the fuel, so that's quite good. Whereas if you've imported bees from the southern Mediterranean, they are going to need more food, although they will fly less during the winter months. But they tend to eat more food. And I even know of beekeepers who've been feeding their bees through 2021. They were feeding their bees sugar all year round. So we need to think about feeding the bees. What is it they eat? They eat the nectar and they need the pollen. So they need the flowers. So you want simple flowers. Now, there was some great research in the Welsh Botanic Gardens, and they have 8,000 species of plants around their botanic gardens, and they have honeybees, and they wanted to see which plants the bees favoured to make the honey. So they had their honey all tested, and what they found was the bees favoured 11 species. 11 species. Now, what's really interesting is what those species were. It was hazel, willow, ash, alder, hawthorn, bramble, dandelion, clover, So you're getting the picture. It was the wildflowers. It wasn't the plants that were in the botanic gardens. The bees were leaving the botanic gardens and going to the wildflowers in the hedgerows. So why would the bees choose wildflowers or the weeds rather than this amazing exotic cocktail? So I believe the reason is because they're always looking for good, nutritious food. And because of the intrinsic communications between plants, the bees know what food is nutritious. And so they're going to search for the plants that they can self-medicate with. They're going to have plants that will give them a strong immunity, that will protect them from different diseases. So that's what they do if they can. But if we've lost the wildflower meadows, if we've lost the hedgerows, then they don't have that food. So what you need to do is, before you think about keeping bees, you need to look at where you live and what your environment is. And is there enough food for not only all the native species, so the 270 species in Britain, or if you're in North America, there'll be 4,000 species. But globally, we've got 22,000 species. They all need feed. They all need feeding. They all need the food. So before you start introducing bees, think about, have you got the food for them? So what I will be talking about tomorrow is which hive. And the way I advocate having bees, if you really want to keep bees, honeybees, is that you have a hive, but you let the native bees move in. You let wild bees or a swarm from a neighbouring colony move in, because then you're not upsetting the food balance. Now, in some cities, bees have been doing really well for a number of years, but because people keep buying in bees, the bees are now starving because there's more bees than forage to go around. So we really need to consider this. Then you may think, oh, the countryside, it's full of plants and things and trees to feed the bees, but actually it isn't. We have all these monocultures of grasses or of crops, cereal crops, that don't feed bees at all. We've lost 98% of our wildflower meadows in the last 70 years. So what are the bees feeding on? They need the hedgerows, they need the ancient trees. Goodness knows how long it takes before a tree will flower. Ivy will take 15 years before it flowers. So, if you're going to feed your bees, you think, oh, I'll put a bit of ivy here, or I'll plant a lime tree there. Think how long it's going to be before they have sufficient flowers to feed your bees. So one ancient tree can have an acre's worth of flowers around the tree. So that's great. But how long does the tree flower for? Lime trees might flower for 3 weeks. Ivy might flower for 6 weeks. So there's 52 weeks in the year. So have a look at what you've got in your environment. So what your neighbours have got in their gardens, what have you got in your gardens? And think about large sweeps of plants. And then you need to know about the nectar flow. So if you have something like borage is a great weed, it's wonderful. In fact, the Romans used to grow borage to make what they call happy honey, because actually borage contains the feel-good hormones. So when you eat borage, or when you have the herb, or when you have it in the honey, it would uplift your spirits. So it'd be really good for the Roman troops who were stuck in some pretty dismal forts in the cold British weather. So they would have their borage honey. Now, the good thing about borage is it replenishes its nectar every 24 seconds. So you could have one plant of borage and the bees can be going round and round and round it and getting plenty of nectar. You could have a lime tree, which is a great crop for Britain, but the nectar will only rise if you have the sort of stormy, warm, midsummer weather. So Glastonbury festival weather, that's what they're looking for the lime tree to bloom. So it's being really aware of what plants you've got. So the challenge today, feeding the bees. I'd like you to write in the comments when I post up the video, I'd like you to say, what plants have you already got for your bees? And if you don't have bees, what plants are you going to think of to actually plant in your garden or in your area, so that you've got enough food, not only for your native bees, but also for honeybees if they move into your garden. So have a think about what's feeding. There are plenty of books. I was going to pull them out. There's a great book called Plants for Bees, which is, here we go, we have that. Then there is Sarah Wyndham Lewis has written a great book, which is Planting for Honeybees. which I've got here somewhere. Then there's another book that Highgate Honey produced, which is 80 Flowers for Bees. I have that one on my website, so if you really want to get yourself a copy of that, I'll post a picture of it later. But this is a great book. It's a bit of a tome, but it talks about all the different plants and what they provide for bees, whether they provide food, whether you get nectar from them, whether they'll get nectar, whether they get pollen, whether you have a honey crop. So they're really great. It's really great for information about bees. But you don't have to read a book before you do the challenge. I just want you to have a think. Just have a walk around your garden, have a look out the window. Just have a think about, what are you going to plant for your bees? What are the plants that you think would feed your bees? And it's also, although borage is good and you could have one single borage and it will feed a lot of bees, it's really got to be worthwhile for the bees to fly from wherever their hive is to feed up, because they want to get one source of nectar, one source of pollen from one trip. So it's no good having a single sunflower. So actually, that's not such a good example. Sunflowers are brilliant. But if you have perhaps a little rosemary bush in a plant, and it's only got a couple of flowers in, that's not going to feed, it's not going to fill a whole crop. So you want a nice big clump. So think of 3-5 plants of one plant, and think about things that are going to be flowering throughout the year. Okay, so challenge day number 2, feeding your bees. Think about, what are you going to feed the bees? And this is so important. This is really important groundwork before you start having bees or keeping bees in your environment. So really be sure that you've laid the foundations and that you've got what the bees need to be healthy. And we are what we eat, and the bees are what they eat. So it's making sure that they have really good, nutritious food. So you want dandelion lawns, you want clover, you want hedgerows, you want some good trees, good big old trees, and wildflowers. And then, of course, you don't want chemicals. We don't want to be poisoning the bees. So really think about this. If your neighbours or your neighbouring farmer uses a lot of chemicals, then talk to them and say, look, I'm thinking about having bees, which would improve your crops, but I need to know what you're putting on your plants, what you're putting on your crops, because that could kill my bees. And it's raising awareness, because so often people don't realise the damage they're doing. Every time you spray something to kill it, that something is going into the soil and coming up in another flower, and it will be in the nectar. And research has shown that these chemicals, the pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, they all get transferred into honey. So they're in the wax in the hive, and they're also in the honey. So no wonder the bees need our help. So now it's a call to action. We've got to save the bees. And to save the bees, we need to feed them, and we need to give them good, nutritious, toxic-free food. So comment below. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to be back tomorrow morning for day 3, which is all about your hives. So if you haven't already, then click on the link that I shared yesterday. I'll put it in the comments again today, or it's in my bio if you're on Instagram. And it's to join the Naturopathic Beekeeping Challenge. And if you click on that link and you send me your email, you will get a free download of my sort of booklet, which is top 10 beehives. So I talk about the top beehives, either for bees and or for beekeeping if you want to take honey. So it's a really good review of my favorite hives and the hives that my bees favor. So take a look at that. And if you complete the challenge, all 3 days, then you've got a chance of winning some prizes. So next Wednesday, I'll be doing a webinar all about naturopathic beekeeping, and I'll be announcing the winners. So make sure you comment, tag a friend below, share the post, let's spread the news. Even if people don't want to keep bees, but they just want to know more about bees, get them to do the challenge. Let's all have a think about what we can do to save the bees. So thank you very much. Go off, have a great day, and think about how you can feed your bees. Bye.